traffic safety work group meeting of Thursday, September 17th at 10:30 a.m. We're meeting remotely per Governor Baker's orders, dictates. All votes will be taken by roll call, and public comment will be taken. We will allow, we'll have discussion first amongst work group members, and then we'll ask for public comment following that. So with that, we'll move on to the agenda. Is there any public comment for items that are not on the published agenda?
Hi, Art. This is Mickey Perry. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you, Mickey. Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. I just happened to learn of the meeting, so I apologize for not getting something to you in writing sooner. My request is that perhaps you could revisit the posted speed limit on South Shore Road, because it's always been pretty tricky and dicey, but it's just gotten worse. And I sent an email to Erica this morning so you can see my concerns. I don't want to take up your time, but I just wanted to see if we could perhaps look at that and review what's posted and what we can do. And I know there's some strings with the state, and I know there's a bunch of other issues, which I put in the email, but if we could perhaps just look at this, given all that's going on, that'd be great.
Okay. We will, since it was for under public comment, we typically don't get into discussion of that, but I think what we commit to do is put it on our next agenda, as well as to do some research before then. And then, you know, we could have a greater discussion and or even potentially some kind of action item for the next meeting.
That's great. Thanks so much. I just wanted to get it to someone's attention.
Thank you, Mickey.
Thank you for your time.
Bye.
Bye.
Is there any other public comment for items which are not listed on the agenda?
Yes. Hi, this is Hillary Rayport. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Hi, Hillary.
Hi. Thanks. Sorry, my camera isn't working. So sorry, I can't turn on my camera. I just wanted to come to say hello and introduce the Nantucket Historical Commission. I of course pay attention to all of the news about the roads and work very closely with the DPW, Bob McNeil in the planning department. Holly Bacchus is our staff liaison, but we've never really had an opportunity to meet. I haven't been able to come and talk with this committee, so I just wanted to come during public comment just to express appreciation for everything you're doing to increase safety on the island, pay attention to the details of the road, and also explain that the Historical Commission exists as the Preservation Planning Commission. So whereas the HDC is looking at architectural review, we're working with Holly to think about how the development and growth of Nantucket intersects with our collective interests as a community in preserving what is special that we love about the island. And I do think there's some overlap. So I'd love to be proactive about collaborating. And I just wanted to say that and, you know, introduce myself and the commission.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, and certainly appreciate your efforts as well.
Great. Well, thanks. I hope we can maybe follow up and think about ways we could work together and, you know, protect our island.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment for items which are not listed on the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on to the published agenda or official business, which was started off to review requests for no parking on long portions of Joy Street. I see that we have Ms. Barrett with us who made the request. We have not received anything from the planning department or planning director or responses for any kind of plans related to that. So I'm not really sure where we're going to go with it. Ms. Barrett, must be frustrating. I'm frustrated too.
A little bit. I've reached out to Andrew several times. I tried to call him again on Thursday last week and nothing. I've emailed him several times. I mean, I guess short of trying to go down there to see him, I don't know what else to do.
I'm in the same boat.
So I guess it gets held till next meeting.
I'm not really sure what else, unless any work group members have any suggestions or want to make a motion or take action on what's before us. It doesn't have to be held. Certainly the floor is open and it's a published agenda item. So the proposal, just to sort of refresh everyone's memory, is whether to make, as Erica has on the screen right now, the west side of Joy Street has no parking and no parking for the first 20 feet of the road on both sides. Again, this is the part of the truck route, and so the parking situation is making things difficult. Past discussion was that it seemed that it may be best to have an actual plan and examine, exactly which side perhaps should be no parking, and but we don't seem to really be getting anywhere with that. So, the floor is open. We could either adopt what's proposed, or we could carry it forward to, again, try to get some kind of plan developed for this. Is there any discussion from work group members?
Yeah. So what would the plan help us decide?
So I think part of the discussion was looking at driveways and whether or not, the no parking should be on one side or the other. Should it all be on? Is it good policy making to, restrict parking based on not more closely examining it? Or is this enough? And we have a situation with the tractor trailer trucks that, we could try this. It's obviously going to be a recommendation to the select board. So I think that's part of the concern as well, that once we make a recommendation, this is what's going to go in front of them. And it would have been, I think, much better to have, a better, more an improved plan prepared from a transportation planning and town perspective to put forward, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay. I mean, the last time I was here, we were talking about the same thing, so that's why I was curious. My vision hadn't been had. That's all.
No, we haven't been able to get any kind of a plan or anything out of planning and understanding the transportation planner, but that's now been 7 months or something.
Understood. Sure. I mean, it definitely is an issue that needs to be addressed, and it has for a long time.
Well, we could try this and see if the select board, wants to go ahead on this suggestion. I mean, it's being brought forth by, a member of our community that, it is serving the community and directly impacts in terms of the ability to navigate that area. So, the floor is open for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we go ahead and do what they're asking for. It gets something started. I mean, we adjust it.
Okay, the motion's been made. Is there a second?
Can we clarify that, please? Jack?
I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Rob, you kind of broke up.
I'm just looking for a clarification of the ask. Is it based on the sketch?
Yes.
So
It would be based on the request. It would be no parking along the west side and no parking on either side for the first 70 feet.
Okay, and that's what you were looking for, Jack?
Yes.
Okay, I will second that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. Mr. Gardner?
Yes.
Mr. McNeil?
Yes.
Mr. McVicker?
Yes.
The chair votes aye. Okay, Ms. Barrett,
Thank you.
it down the field. So we'll send this to the town manager, and then whether or not she feels additional information, or maybe she would have better luck having another plan prepared to show this if that's what she wants for presenting to the select board. But that would be the next step.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Moving on to review from last meeting, a request to post a portion of Starbuck Road as no parking. We had some discussion. Some neighbors in the area had submitted a request with some photos of cars, the beach access down there, and the discussion that we had at the last meeting was whether or not the parking there would impede emergency access and public safety. And we have an email from Mr. Bates from Nantucket Fire Department, and based on his conclusion and recommendation is that there was no need for the no parking signage. He did say that we could do a little bit of trimming. It is a public road, so the question would be whether or not to go ahead and do that. Excuse me for 1 minute. I'm sorry.
While we're on pause, does anyone happen to have the meeting on YouTube right now? Because there's getting tremendous feedback and I'm not really sure why.
Okay, I could certainly open that at the same time. But again, my apologies. Is there anybody that would like to speak on the application from the public related to Starbuck Road?
Well, the thing is, the brush cutting on the side, if you cut it back some, it's going to help with the parking quite a bit, because that stuff just keeps growing in a little more each year, and it's taking up space on the sides of the road. But there's so much brush cutting like this all over the island. It's hard for the DPW to keep up with it.
So brush cutting occurs in the winter, and we
Right.
certainly would include this area as part of a brush cutting effort. We've been making strides in meaningfully cutting back rights of way for the last 3 years. And this would certainly could be and would be added to the list. Generally, brush isn't growing back like grass or the stuff that grows faster than grass along some of the bike paths and roadways, which is like the exotic invasive species. But I think once this gets cut back, it's that way for quite some time. Not expected to grow back in the middle of summer and cause any other issues.
Well, why don't we give that a try for this year and see how it is next summer?
Is that a motion that we would try the brush cutting and not the parking restrictions at this time?
Right.
Is there a second?
I'd second that.
Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. McNeil?
Yes.
Mr. Gardner?
Yes.
Vicar?
Yes.
Chair also votes aye. Thank you. Erica, I don't see this meeting on YouTube.
Mute.
Yeah, sorry, you're right, because it's being recorded. It's not even on yet. There was just some weird feedback.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So moving on to the next agenda item, discussion of vegetation management along Hansen, Orcoir, and Lover's Lane. I had submitted this. It's been something that I've been bringing up for the past 5 years or so. The DPW did a great job a couple of years ago of taking the brush back, but it hasn't really been maintained, and it hasn't been cut at all this year. So I also think there was areas that additional brush needs to be cut back further. understanding that gets done in the winter. Some of the sight lines are rather compromised. I know pulling out of Orcoir Webster onto Hansen Airport Road, some ornamental grasses have been planted there around a transformer that significantly blocked the view of oncoming traffic. And so I was just hoping that we could get this back onto the radar for both regular maintenance of the shoulders as well as a bigger project over the winter for taking that brush back. We have the surveys from the bike path. So I don't think there's really right of way issues or concerns there. And that was it. I just wanted to talk about it. Rob, is that something we can do, or?
Yeah, I think the thought initially was that it was cut back and we were to maintain that. I know it was growing in to some degree before I got here. The thought as far as the redevelopment with the inclusion of the bike path out there was specifically that the request along Hansen and Orcoir and Lover's Lane was from the abutters, was to try to maintain as much of the existing vegetation between the bike path and the roadway as possible, and the houses. So while we did cut it back initially and have been trimming and maintaining it, the idea of going further in one direction or the other was not something we were expecting to do until we have the plans published and approved, so that we don't unnecessarily cut out acres of brush that would be hoped to be, I guess, maintained as part of the screening between the new proposed path and the street. So it's kind of, I don't have an issue going in to do it. I'm just giving you kind of a background of why it hasn't been done further than what we initially cut it to. You know, if the committee is interested in cutting it back further, you know, we can certainly consider it, see what they have to say.
I would think that because of the curves, you know, in the road for sight distances, that the vegetation should get cut back a little bit more anyway, you know, a bit more than the sort of the 2 feet. There's still, I think, sight distances that need to be looked at. And perhaps there are areas where, and I know this gets difficult to tell a crew, you know, only go back further in a certain area, but maybe with some oversight, you know, those areas by, you know, one of your team leaders could be determined to where it needs to get taken back a little bit more. So I guess, you know, if we could just bring that to the attention for having a look at it, and the maintenance. There's been, like I say, no trimming this year, no mowing. It's really, it doesn't take long for that stuff to come back. And now what you have is a situation that we're back to the same spot. When you have pedestrians in that road, they have no refuge. They can't, it's too thick to, you know, they're jumping back now into stuff that is, there's no real road shoulder there. And, you know, the speed of the vehicles, there's an awfully lot of folks that go, you know, from the airport down towards the beach there. And so I do think that it's a, you know, a public safety issue, which is why I brought it up. I don't know that we need action unless someone wants to take formal action, but I thought it was a worthy discussion item given the number of pedestrians and the sight lines. Erica, you're muted.
I just wanted to note that I live in the area, and so I traverse those roads multiple times a day. And especially at the intersections from the side roads along Hansen and Orcoir, when you are pulling out onto the main roads, it is very dangerous. And I've almost gotten clipped quite a few times. And I'm careful. I creep out and You just cannot see the oncoming traffic until it's right there.
Thank you. That's been my observation as well. Mr. McVicker?
So, Rob, so is it a plan for the fall to cut this back? You know, not further than existing, but cut it back so that people would be able to walk on the shoulder of the road?
So yes, we would be cutting this back over the winter as part of our brush cutting plan.
Would that fix the problem? All right.
I think it's going to improve the situation out there. I think just to the point that's been made about the intersections, what we have found with the base plans survey for a lot of the corridor is the town does not own a lot of these spaces where site distance cutbacks would serve to increase the site distance for people stopped and pulling out. So as part of the bike path improvement plans, it's our intent to work with the neighbors and the abutters that do own these areas where site triangles should be cleared in the future to gain the appropriate easements necessary as needed through those areas.
I mean,
so we can do what we can through the winter for brush cutting, but some of these more meaningful cutbacks we're finding not just here, but on a lot of other corridors. Pulpus is another one of them where, you know, we can cut what we can within the right of way, but we don't have easements for some of the abutting properties, particularly around the intersections.
This is Erica again, as a private citizen. I would note that the taking plans actually show that they go into some of the private roads. So I would imagine that you would have access to cut those corners back a little bit.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this roadway is pretty much centered at a 20-foot road and a 40-foot layout. So I mean, 10 feet, if you took it back to even that point and then carried that from the intersection, I understand that not all neighbors will be happy with it, but if it's in the road layout, it's in the road layout. If it improves the site distances, I would hope near there we could at least go back to 10 feet instead of the kind of the 4 or the 2 to 4. And I also would hope that we wouldn't wait for winter for the first mow of just a shoulder maintenance of what was brush cut.
Yeah, but we definitely will be waiting until winter. We have a brush cutter that's broken, and we don't have any staff to do anything beyond what we're currently trying to keep up with.
I think we ought to give it a try and cut it back some there. And then once we get the plans and everything on the road, then we can get it cut back to the proper distance. But get it back some anyway.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Anything further from anyone on this? All right, thanks, Rob. Moving on to review of the Pleasant Street to one-way pilot plan. Rob, you had submitted this. Do you want to review it with us?
Sure. So this effort was a request by the transportation planner to have the consultant take a look at options available to model Pleasant Street as one-way to try to manage bikes and pedestrians along particularly the stretch between Atlantic Ave and William Street. There's a fair amount of detail on the plans that show pylons or barrels separating the different uses with transition points along the way on the ends. Two-directional traffic for bikes on the protected lane and on the first sheet, and then as you go through back towards Williams Lane, you'll see that just Lower Pleasant has a one-way, 2 5 corners and bi-directional bike traffic with, I believe, just a stripe separating. Very, if you know that area, it's very limited pavement through there. I think the section is only about 20 feet. There's Lower Pleasant beyond Williams that continues that same scheme, which basically would allow traffic to flow from the Sparks Avenue roundabout all the way to Five Corners with single lane, one way out of town, or one way to Five Corners from the roundabout. And the suggested separation for this pilot would be a series of reflectorized barrels, signage, and pavement markings. I think this is something that it certainly predates my time here. I'm not sure if any of the traffic safety members present have been involved with any of the discussions on this before my time. And obviously the transportation planner is not here to talk about it. But I know there's additional discussions about improvements along the corridors of Sparks, Pleasant, and Williams that do not include one-way schemes, but something more along the lines of on-street parking, trying to get more meaningful sidewalks to move pedestrians, as well as accommodations for bikes where possible. But I'm happy to hear from the rest of you or anyone from the public who's been looking for this. I mean, anytime we've talked about the stretch between Atlantic and Williams, as far as pedestrian accommodations, we seem to be met with open arms from the neighbors and abutters, because they are out there in trying to make it happen. I know I saw Sam on here. The Phelan family has been very supportive of pedestrians through and around their property, going so far as removing sections of split rail to be able to allow pedestrians a respite to be able to walk through the field through their property. So we will, regardless of what's ultimately agreed upon for a scheme of traffic through this area, we look forward to continuing the conversation with the Phelan family through their property, because that's definitely a pinch point and a key discussion area for any improvements that are proposed here.
Thank you. Any other work group members have any thoughts or comments, want to discuss this further?
What's going to happen to this traffic now? Is this going to put more traffic up on Sparks Avenue?
Absolutely.
And Sparks Avenue is a mess, especially during the summertime. I mean, you can't get any more traffic on that. It gets backed up all the way back to the gas station sometimes.
I think what I would ask everyone to look at, and I have been every time I drive this road since this discussion started, when you're going in the way that's proposed to be one way, pay attention and look at how many cars are coming at you in the other direction. There's a lot of traffic. All of those cars are going to have to go somewhere else. And I'm absolutely opposed to this. I think that is going to have enormous ramifications on the other intersections to take this corridor away, and that any people that drivers that need to go down these streets that are connecting to this are going to have to loop around now, again, creating, more traffic and more circulation. I mean, it's hard not to be, everyone in favor of making a more bicycle friendly island and considering pedestrians, but I really believe the right way here is going back to like the 96 plans for sidewalk improvements and, widen the corridor, takings if needed, that, and maintaining your two-way traffic flow. That's just my personal opinion, is that the impacts of doing this, and then the thought to me of this is going to be done with barrels, I don't think is at all keeping with, Nantucket, that the barrel that has still been sitting on Broad Street for a dozen years now, and we're going to have a whole bunch of those the whole way. I can't support that. Anyone else? I see we have the public here. Would anyone like to speak on this?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Murphy.
sorry being late. I imagine we're talking about Pleasant Street.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Chair, you kind of hit on my one concern that I was looking at the plans, the way it was drawn. And I've said it before, one of the biggest things that I have concerns with is flow of emergency vehicles and being able to access areas. If those barrels were put up or dividers were put up for a bike lane or any barrier like that, there would be no place for a car to pull over really anywhere during that stretch, and we'd have no access around them. So that was one of the main concerns I had with that, is that simply if we were stuck in that area and traffic was backed up at 5 Corners, we would have no route around vehicles in order to proceed. Where now normally we would take the other travel lane with lots of noise and make our way.
Good point. Thank you.
Has anybody taken a traffic study during the summer to see how much of outbound traffic there is? Because that's what you're talking about disrupting.
That's correct.
Probably moving the outbound traffic up to Atlantic Avenue.
Or Orange Street.
Some of it that originates downtown will go out Orange Street. That's right, or Washington.
Right. I'm not aware of a current traffic study related to that. I just could tell you my own observations is there's an awful lot of vehicles I sense almost even on a year-round basis.
Art, it's Ken Beaugrand. One of the things that I noticed in that is that you're going to now you're going to have all of the traffic from the 2 banks now have to go back into town, whereas at this present point in time with the 2-way traffic, at least half of them, or a good portion of them, don't have to go back into town up to 5 Corners. So you're going to have even more congestion at 5 Corners than you already have at this point in time, because of the fact that they have to go into town in order to be able to get out of town.
That's my point as well. Thank you, Mr. Beaugrand.
Mr. Chair, Hillary Rayport has been patiently waiting with her hand up.
Okay, I see that. Let me go to Mr. McVicker, and then I'll go to Ms. Rayport.
So I don't support it. I don't support this idea either, but because of the points that have been made, but I do have and you talked about a traffic study. How many bikes and pedestrians are we talking about traversing this area? Like, so instead of the cars, how many bikes and pedestrians are we talking about that makes this more important?
I don't have an answer to that, but I wondered the same. And you would have this in place for all of winter as well. So you're gonna have even less pedestrians and bicyclists, while, the level of commerce and trade activity and traffic is all unable to use that lane.
Was this plan also talked about in conjunction with a turning lane from Surfside onto Sparks through the high school?
So I do not have a history of either a traffic study by the transportation planner or anything being investigated as part of another transportation study in conjunction with this proposal. I think it was, I don't know where the bike pedestrian corridor or this pilot originated from. I am a bit curious, Mr. Chair, you mentioned earlier a 1996 sidewalk plan. I'm not familiar with that, but I'd be interested to check it out. especially if it talked about acquiring right-of-way. That is one thing that certainly this corridor is quite short of in some key areas, which is why I think people have been trying to creatively come up with solutions. But to your point, Lieutenant, solutions to what, right? And if there's no real need or demonstrated need, is this really justified? I think back to your point, Chief, just briefly, from hearing from the engineers regarding the use of barrels along the corridor, the idea of barrels was that they are flexible and could be simply pushed out of the way in the event of an emergency, as opposed to something more permanent like jersey barriers. So that just to make a point there. But part of the answer about the solutions, Lieutenant, has to do more about not necessarily what exists currently for traffic for bikes and pedestrians, but it's sort of the goal of allowing or providing facilities to encourage that activity, to give people options to get away from vehicle use and get into alternatives. And that's part of the strategic plan for the select board. So I think that is a part of the goal of this particular connection point, is to get people to have an option if they want to take it.
I'd love to say something, if I may.
Yes, please, Ms. Rayford.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so I'll make a couple of comments. I've been following this situation for some time, and I'll comment as just a resident, and then also a little bit with my historical commission hat on. So speaking as a resident, I use this corridor every day. I live on Main Street. I'm really familiar with this corridor. I've spoken with the Phelan family, other residents, with Jason Bridges, a lot about this. I'm also a cyclist, and it's actually would only take about 1 minute longer for me to bike from where I live to the Stop and Shop to do my grocery shopping. And I would just never, ever, ever choose to bike, whereas I regularly walk to the downtown Stop and Shop to avoid having to use my car, even though it takes me longer to walk to the Stop and Shop. So the reason why I would never bike that route is that it's just not safe, and it's not pleasant, and it's not good for your health because it's really polluted because of all of the emissions of cars in the high season. So I think that just thinking about planning and cycling, making this corridor safer for pedestrians, and just not forget about safe, just accessible to pedestrians and cyclists, is really, really high priority. And I think a tremendous number of people would use it. We have the people that we have on this call and in this meeting today, but I think if you had a public meeting about this, you would hear a lot of people very concerned about traffic, as you all are, but also really motivated to make it work. So I would like to just ask this committee, instead of, can we say, all right, this is a priority for our community. What do we need to do to make it work? What has to happen to make this work? And, in my work with the Historical Commission, I think, I've spent a tremendous amount of time studying roundabouts, studying modifications to roads, reviewing all the options with roundabouts. I do know that there has been a traffic study on this corridor looking at bikes and looking at traffic flow. I don't have it readily available. I looked for it while you all were talking, but I know that can be supplied, and I hope it will be considered. But I think that to make this work, we really have to get a handle on this answer of what the impacts are at Four Corners, and also at Sparks, because right now the roundabout, the rotary at Milestone, it's not a roundabout, it's a rotary. It doesn't function properly, and it backs up traffic onto Sparks, which backs up traffic, all the way to that roundabout, and it's just a big jam. So I don't know how long it would take us to get to this vision that Rob is presenting and others have worked on for Pleasant Street, but I think it's a huge priority. And I think taking this look at this system of these roads that would be the 5 corners, the 4 corners, and Milestone together, and do a study of the impacts all together is what needs to happen to get people comfortable where they can say, yes, you know, let's do something like this. And I really, really hope, just from an island planning perspective, that we could find a way as a community to make that happen. The other comment, putting on my historical commissioner hat, we're really concerned about signs, and I know we're not alone. I want to thank the DPW because I've noticed these very lovely pedestrian crossing signs on Mattakit Road, on Pulpus Road. They are not fluorescent, they're not huge, and they really help, and I think they fit into Nantucket a lot. I think that it's really easy when we're working with engineers that do, you know, most of any engineering company, if it's Beta, if it's a GPI, if it's any of the others, most of their business is going to be off island, and they're working on templates from manuals for off island work. We really have to be vigilant about how these standards are, you know, how they might impact our island, and changing them. So that's just sort of a general comment as we think about changes to road systems and signage, that we're just really careful about that. And I would like to invite all of you, invite projects to come to our commission. We would be happy to volunteer the time to give our opinion about that. You know, we don't have any power. We just have the power of our hard work and our informed opinions, and we're always happy to share them. And I will stop talking now. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I would have one question back to you, which is, how do you feel about the barrels?
I think the barrels are problematic, but I mean, that's a temporary solution, and I'm sure there could be other solutions that we could come up with. I mean, the question is, do we need a physical separation? Yes or no? I mean, ultimately, we're not going to have a physical separation. I heard Rob say it's just going to be a painted line. I mean, you know, you see places where they have these white plastic bollards, which are terrible. I can tell you, I'm in Boston now, all around Boston Common, they have like temporary orange separations to create a bike lane all along Arlington Street around Boston Common. It looks terrible, but I guess I would say that's the least of the concerns right now, because I'm sure Rob can come up with other creative suggestions.
Well, I would say that the barrel on Broad Street 12 years ago was supposed to be temporary too.
I think we should continue to work towards widening that street out, because I understand the property owners are willing to work with us. It's probably going to take us a little longer, but let's do it and do it right while we're doing it.
Agreed. And Ms. Rayport, I fully agree. I think it's a much bigger transportation planning type of an initiative, you know, to come up from one road to a higher altitude and look at the network, which is my point related to that. You're removing the traffic from this corridor, puts it all in other corridors, and will create additional, circling. I bike too, and I know that, that's, it's also not good for pedestrians and walkers either. I mean, it's all part of needing to, I think, look at the infrastructure that's there, and trying to come up with something. That's just my personal opinion, but I think it takes more than just taking away a vehicle lane, in my opinion.
If we move this over to Sparks Avenue, that's really going to make a mess over there. And once we make the move, we aren't going to end up doing it the right way on Pleasant Street. It's going to end up staying that way. I think it needs to be done right first time.
Is there any further discussion from members of the work group, members of the public? Mr. Murphy?
Back to the barrels too, and the point that they can be moved. I really don't, if there's not a travel lane there that's available without significant delays of response, like pictures, barrels, kind of somebody getting out, moving barrels, moving barrels, moving barrels. I don't know how many barrels there are, but anything which restrict flow I'd be against. So even if they were movable barrels, it still would defeat our mission in response times.
Mr. Phelan?
Yeah, the barrel idea probably won't fly, but there are plenty of alternatives to barrels. And I think if you go to other communities and see what they've done in terms of bike lanes and whatnot, you'll find more than one or two acceptable alternatives. The other thing I'll ask you to do is just consider the nature of that stretch of road right now from Five Corners down to Williams Lane and what its contribution is to Nantucket from a scenic and a historic standpoint, and how you can preserve that with any alternative that you come up with. I would hate to see this become just an exercise in how to move vehicles. It's a much more complex problem than that.
I agree, and there's some pretty special trees along there and other challenges, you know, that if you want to look at it straight from, you know, an infrastructure and a widening perspective, and I think that's part of why this, you know, hasn't happened. But I think this plan goes all the way back to West Creek, and there's almost 2 points that it could be the discussion related to the segment that you just mentioned, from Williams to Five Corners versus the whole stretch. But right now, what's before us is the whole stretch,
Right.
and I think there's a lot of impacts from that. But I think we're starting to go around a little bit. Is there a motion to not support this, or further study, or any other discussion?
I'd like to make a motion that we refer this back to the Planning Commission and see if they can't move along that Pleasant Street area a little faster than what's been going on with it.
And would that be while maintaining two-way flow, or?
Yeah, right, for the two-way road. Try and get that land and the Phelan land and some other land along there, so they get some sidewalks, a bike path down there.
Is there a second to that motion? Mr. Murphy, seconds. So the motion's been made and seconded, and further discussion. I would add, Mr. McNeil, the plan I referred to was used as the base plan for the discussion at the last meeting. I don't know where that exists at the planning department. I didn't see it in the packet from last time. I was just trying to find it. But there was a sketch plan done for the one-way traffic, and that used a survey plan that was done for sidewalk improvements in that area back, I think it was in '96.
Gotcha.
So the motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Gardner?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. McVicker?
Yes.
Mr. McNeil?
Yes.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you. Moving on to the agenda. Let me just get back to my agenda from the packet. Sorry. We had a review of on-street parking along Macy's Lane, and this morning the applicant or the requestor asked that her request be withdrawn. We do have information in the packet if anyone still wanted to have a discussion about the parking along Macy's Lane, or we could simply table it. Hearing no interest, we will remove that from our agenda. The next item was for review a request for speed humps on Cliff Road. And we had a member of the public along Cliff Road ask if we could consider putting speed bumps in. I would mention that that is part of the reverse truck route. We could advise them to go through the typical study process related to speed humps, or what I wouldn't want to see is if there was going to be no support for them anyway, given the truck route, to have an owner, a property owner go down or essentially a fruitless road. So we'll open it up for discussion. Is there any support for speed humps on Cliff Road in that vicinity along? We're talking about, I think they said they're in somewhere around 21, maybe 34. So again, we're talking about from the section from, say, North Liberty to town. Any interest in speed humps? Hearing none.
I'm sorry, I had my hand raised.
I'm sorry, I gotta look at that better. Sorry.
I just wanted to note that the process for requesting speed humps requires the transportation planner to put out the equipment and do the analyzing of the information that comes back out of that. As we all know, we do not have a transportation planner, and I've checked with the Plus office, and those services are not available right now. So it would be fruitless, I think, to refer anyone to even forward the study request to anyone, because it's just going to fall to a dead end because there's no one to do the work. And I do want to remind everyone that this is part of the reverse truck route. Hughes Transport uses this actually almost every day from the steamship going to the dump in that direction. And then when we need to close the regular truck route that goes Prospect, Sparks Ave, and then around to Orange Street, that is our main use. And I think to put speed humps in there would really exacerbate the neighborhood more than the speeding almost.
Okay. We should respond though, I think, to the owner that made the request that there's no support for the installation of the speed humps, if everyone agrees. Hearing no, we'll consider that by unanimous consent to just let them know there's no support for those speed humps. Moving on, we had a request for, I believe, a yellow line at 21 Cliff Road. Erica, is this the one that you also told me was resolved?
Yes, she asked to take this off the agenda.
Okay, so that's been resolved and removed. With that, we have a last item of review of suggested traffic and pedestrian safety improvements along Washington Ave and Matticat Road, which we have discussed previously in the past, this corridor. And Erica, perhaps you could share your screen. So we have a submission from a citizen who's here with us to restrict parking along the section of Washington Ave, to create a pedestrian path and to remove encroachments for parking closer to the pier. And I know that this is also part of the NERDA turnaround route, and I think that's part of the discussions that from a traffic safety perspective that we've had in the past. I would turn it over to Ms. Stolte if she would like to further the presentation, and then we'll have discussion.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I apologize right now if I have to turn this off because I'm alone in the office because of homeschooling and there's a storm coming. So I actually first sent a letter to the Board of Selectmen in March of 2014 about the traffic at the intersection by Millie's Restaurant where Washington meets Matticat Road. And all kinds of studies have been done, and the layout of the road has been marked by a surveyor, and nothing's been done. Parking signs went up, people still park there, and there's chaos on every really sunny night when people are walking to the beach, trying to get to the Nerda bus stop, and coming from the beach. People walking dogs, people leaving Millie's with their takeout. And since I was asked by Mr. Beauregard to come up with an idea that's the least expense to the town, I took a picture that's there from D Street, which is where the Nerda bus turns onto Washington Avenue, facing towards Matticat Road. On the left-hand side, there's about 10 feet that is actually part of the road that's not paved, that was staked out, that a little footpath could be installed. And I'm thinking like the footpath people use to go to Cisco Brewers, where they park and then they walk down along the road, since the other side of the road there had split rail fence put up to prevent parking. But the way the road is now, if you're walking on the road, you don't realize that that's actually Washington Avenue. You think it's somebody's lawn, and you wouldn't want to step off to get out of the way of the traffic. So it's the best idea that I could come up with that is least invasive to the neighbors, least expensive to the town, and would offer a solution to pedestrians, which every other article that you've looked at or item that you've looked at now talks about pedestrian safety and bicycle rights of way, and there's nothing out there.
Okay, thank you. Work group members, any thoughts or further discussion on this request?
Yeah, this problem's going on for years out there. It's been 20 years, I think, since I worked for the DPW, and we used to put no parking signs up both sides of the street out there back then. And I think that area really needs to be no parking because of the buses that come down there and make that left onto Matticat Road to get into their parking place where they're parking in front of Millie's. And I really think it needs to be a no parking area. We used to have it that way years ago. Then people take the signs out, they stay out long enough, and all of a sudden somebody complains again, we put them back again. But it's been that way back and forth for some time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Beaugrand?
Yeah, I asked that this be put on the agenda with Patty as part of the work that I'm doing with respect to encroachments out on Washington Avenue, and also to try to address the answer as to how to deal with the issue out there. And so I wasn't sure exactly how to go through the various steps. So I raised it with roads and right of way as well, because part of what we were looking at is to come up with a determination, because part of the owners out there have said that they would like to have parking on one side of the street from D Street back towards the pier. They would like to have no parking on the other side of the street, and they would like to have the walking path. And then at the section from D Street all the way up to Matticat Road, that there be a yellow line on both sides with no parking and signs, which then allows the police to come out and effectively ticket and start to address the concern with respect to the abuses in the area. So what from the point of view of the DPW and the town, we're trying to figure out a way to be able to make this happen. Who needs to put in place, give the approvals as to where it could be parking, how long the parking could be, which side of the street. And so those are the issues that I was hoping to try and get some direction on and get a resolution and the steps that we can take forward so that we can come up with a solution that the residents of the area are really in favor of. And so I really appreciate Patty's work, pulling the people in the area and coming up with a proposal as a starting point to figure out how to be able to solve this.
Thank you for that. Mr. Greeter?
Hi, thank you. Just a little bit more information for this committee. I'm on the Roads and Right-of-Ways, plus I'm also a resident in Matticat. And as Jack said, over the years, signs come up, disappear. And we've had a whole resurgence or changeover of homeowners in that area. And as typically happens, somebody comes in and they love a neighborhood, and the first thing they want to do is change what's there. The NERDA bus used to go down F Street, down Washington Ave for years. And when it got so that the landscapers and the construction vehicles on the McMansions on the creek, it got so that the bus could not get down there, or it could get down part way and then couldn't back out. They started to use D Street, and D Street, which is not a town road, but somehow D Street got paved. And some vehicles have started parking on D Street, and there's hedges have come out there, making that a tough road for them to take. But that's not a public road, so I think the town would be limited in what it could do for getting that hedge cut back. They started using Baltimore Street, B Street. One of the new homeowners in a butter to B Street realized or found out that that was not an approved accepted town road. It was more of a proprietor's way. And he and his neighbor lives across the other side of that, shut that road down. That road's been traversed for, well, the streets were named alphabetically before people thought to have names on the things. And we call them the alphabet streets. And unfortunately, the alphabet streets are all that way. Roads and right-of-ways actually brought it to them, and we're trying to get it on the list of streets to deal with, because it'd be a shame, the residents feel, to lose those streets. That's part of the character of Matticat, just like the little cottages in Sconset and the little roadways in Sconset. So the bus started using Baltimore. Well, Baltimore got shut down. And now, depending on the driver, the buses are back to using D as in Delta, or they're coming back down F Street. And one of the reasons they're able to come down and make the swing on F Street is because, believe it or not, an encroachment has helped, where somebody put boulders and people couldn't park on the corner, so the bus can make that swing. So the point being is that road is getting increasingly more traffic. This year, Matticat has been the dining out COVID solution. Millie's is the only restaurant that's been able to replicate their entire inside seating outside. And the police department has been good enough to come out. They're short on staff, but they actually developed a plan where folks would call in registration numbers and whatever, and they've been coming out issuing tickets nightly. So at nighttime, it's really exacerbated with the dinner crews and the sunsetters. During the day, it's the beach goers and service landscaping vehicles that are causing the issue. So they've been asking for relief now since, I forget now what the quote was, but they're really looking for something to be done to assist this before somebody gets hurt. It's not a case of will somebody get hurt, it's a case of when somebody's going to get hurt in that area.
Thank you. And so, to be clear, Erica, could we put up on the screen the graphic with exactly what is being asked of the committee?
This one, or was the prior one?
I think this one, if I'm understanding it, is meant to demonstrate existing conditions.
Okay, so you want,
Is that correct, Ms. Stolte? Oh, I might have lost her.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes, so what you're looking at on the screen right now, there's only one house on that route, and it's the one right at the corner where the NERDA bus turns off of D Street that would have to relocate a hedgerow.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else along that route has any real landscaping or shrubbery that would have to be touched. There's a little bit of, just growth around a telephone pole that is actually on the town, the road. It's on Washington Avenue, but it looks like it's in someone's yard. But you could step off on that orange line and walk all the way down to the point, around the corner, and cross over to the entrance to Millie's store, which would not put you behind the Nerd of Us, which no one can see you if you're crossing there, if you're coming down Matticat Road to go to the beach. It just is it's a simple walking path that would take you off of the pavement.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion, Mr. Greer?
So I'll stand back while Patty throws a boat at me for saying this. I disagree to some degree, quite a bit actually, on that. On that side, there are several encroachments that if no parking was enforced on the other side, there are encroachments on what I would call the west side of that. There's a boat at D Street that's there on a trailer that's not registered, that's been there for, it's affectionately called the USS Never Sail. It's been there for a good 5 to 8 years. There's stakes that the homeowner at the corner of Matticat Road and Washington Ave put in. There was sort of like not chain link, but chicken wire kind of fence posts that have been snapped off that probably stick up now 3 inches up. So when people do park in that area, they're going to puncture their tires, or people are going to trip, or God forbid a kid falls on top of them. That's on town property. There's some fencing and hedging further down towards F Street. That if you're going to prohibit parking on the other side, that one would think need to push back. The question was asked, will homeowners be thrilled about this? One could only imagine the answer is no. Some of them don't realize that they don't own out to the pavement, but I think a lot of them do, especially anyone that's had work done that's required a permit, a new septic system, a building, whatever. That's been identified, and so a lot of them do know it, and until they're made to do something, nothing's going to happen.
Thank you. I think what I'm hearing is kind of the same thing, though, maybe just 2 different ways. That I'm going to share my screen real quick, which is the aerial of this section. Take it that this is the U.S. Never Sail, and the question is, in order to create a pedestrian walkway through this area, there may be some encroachments that also need to be removed. But I think that my sense of the application before us are both saying the same thing, that you would make no parking along the north side. I guess you're almost perfect whether it's west or north, but and then create a pedestrian path along, and in doing a pedestrian path, any encroachments that would need to be removed would be removed. I think that's what I'm hearing. Mr. Beaugrand?
Right. And when I discussed this with Rob and Steve, we were proposing that from the triangle at the corner of Matticat and Washington out to where V Street used to be, that both sides of that section of the road would have a yellow stripe with no parking. So from Baltimore out to the corner on both sides, there would be no parking. And the strip that has been identified now that we've had the street surveyed, along where Bill was talking about the stakes the owner has put in, along there would be where the walking path would be. And part of what I am working on is to get the encroachments that are still in place addressed. It is just, it hasn't moved to the exact top of my agenda at this point in time, but it's part of what I am working on to get that straightened out now that we do have a survey that shows how wide the town's right-of-way is.
And so my question would be, if you intend to have a walking path along the south side, don't we effectively have to post both sides as no parking, or people are just going to park on the path?
Yeah, the thing is that I was only focusing on the area from Baltimore out to, in terms of there was going to be no parking on both sides. I don't know the answer to your question. I think that's more a question for the lieutenant as to public safety with respect to the walking path there.
I think if you don't post it that way, it's a sure bet. You'll have just cleared an area to make parking. Mr. Greeter?
Good point. Could you not have the walking path on the no parking side, which would be, and you were correct, I had my directions wrong. So that the north side was no parking and the pedestrian walk area?
Sure, I think that could be there could be multiple possibilities here. I think you could do, if you do that and then allow parking on one side, have you, I guess, does that still work for safety and traffic? Or do you stick, sort of the plan that was before us, I think, with an additional caveat that it essentially be no parking either side from D Street to the intersection, would make it so that you have, and maybe that was the intent of the applicant. It's just when they did the path, thought that also inferred no parking. But I think that we would have to have that discussion and be very clear, because we're gonna have to make a recommendation. The work group, again, is only advisory, so that everybody understands our role. And would be advisory to the town manager, and then hopefully ultimately the select board. But in doing so, I think it would be important to be clear what the intent would be. And I think that's important for the police as well, for, clear direction and ability to enforce, what's being proposed there. Mr. Bogart.
Just to by way of comment, the issue with moving it to the side that's closer to the creek is problematic because, in fact, the roadway itself is very close to where the property lines are, and so the extent of the town's right of way is much more restricted on that side. Is much broader on the other side, closer to Matticat Road.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in some of the places, in fact, like on the corner of Baltimore and Washington, that house, the front steps are right at the edge of the town's right of the street. So again, doing something on that side was much more difficult from the point of view of being able to have a consistency across. And then you have an additional crossing down here, a second time across this road, as opposed to being on the same side all the way and going around the corner to get over to Millie's parking lot.
On Washington Ave, going down Washington Ave, you can't have any parking as you get close to that stop sign on the right-hand side. The buses need that area to get on the right side, not to make that left turn onto Matticat Road.
Agreed. Mr. Murphy?
I think we're kind of getting in the weeds on this one and trying to design the roadway, which is kind of a little out of our scope. I think a good start is to, and I'll make this motion, to have no parking on either side of the roadway from D Street up into the intersection, which may naturally create that walking path on the side and allow visibility for people who are walking to move out of the way. It seems that we have some smart people working on a long-term plan for this as well. And Patty's, work in kind of doing the least expensive short-term is nice. So, I mean, if we can do anything to support that and kind of move pedestrians to the side of the road and create a clear line of sight, I think doing no parking on either side would be that. So that would be my motion.
I'll second your motion.
So the motion's been made and seconded in discussion. Mr. McVicker?
So So I like that idea, Steve. That's exactly what I was thinking, but I would like to also add that they're painted yellow lines on both sides of the road.
Yep. Definitely.
Signs are good, yellow lines are better.
I would take that as a friendly amendment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So the motion has been made, friendly amended, and seconded. Is there any further discussion on, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I go back to see everybody. Is there any further discussion on the motion on the table? Hearing none. Mr. Gardner?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. McVicker?
Yes.
Mr. McNeil?
Yes.
And chair votes aye. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing our concerns.
Absolutely. Moving on the agenda, that was our last item. Is there?
Art, could I have a question?
Mhm.
Through you to Lieutenant Vicker, whether or not there needs to be a separate application or action with respect to the police department in connection to getting their approval for the creation of the yellow line and the no parking indication. I'm just not aware of how what the steps in the process might be.
Yeah, I think Art's going to be able to speak better to this, but I believe it's a recommendation from this board and then a decision made at the selectmen's level.
That's correct. And just to expand a little bit, we're advisory to the town manager. So we will make a formal recommendation to the town manager that this be implemented, and then it will be on her desk for where it goes from there, and hopefully makes it to the select board level for discussion.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other business that was not reasonably anticipated within 48 hours of this meeting? Any work group member comments? Hearing none, we have approval of the minutes of August 20th. Are there any comments? Hearing none, we'll consider them unanimously adopted, and motion to adjourn.
Sorry, every motion has to have roll call. So can you have somebody formally approve the minutes?
I'll motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay, so motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. McVicker?
Yes.
Mr. Gardner?
Yes.
Neil?
Yes.
Thank you. And motion to adjourn.
Motion.
So motion's been made, and is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Murphy?
Aye.
McNeil?
Yes.
McVicker?
Yes.
Mr. Gardner?
Yes.
Chair votes aye. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Art.
All right, see you next time.